Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along today. Appreciate it's in uncertain times. I think by way of greeting, I'd like to offer you all a virtual elbow bump, which seems to be the way these days. So I'd like to introduce ourselves. We're representing Iomart and our service solution provider, Cohesity. My name is Clive Larkin. I'm a commercial solutions consultant, as you can see. And my only colleague here is the technical arm of our presentation, Mr. Adam Worthington, who's the CTO. Adam is going to be going through the meat of the solution and the issues at hand. We're going to be introducing the TLA known as mass data fragmentation. Has anybody heard of that at all? No? Not familiar? Well, you'll know about it at the end. Effectively, it secures, backs up, and identifies and resolves data fragmentation across many locations, across your estate and across third-party estates. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to my learning colleague who's going to take you through what the issues are, what the solution is, and how it can be resolved as a service proposition. Mr. Worthington.
Great, thanks Clive. Hope you can all hear me. I went with the option of not being mic'd up, so yeah, let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough at the back. Yeah, mass data fragmentation. One thing I'll say, it's a huge slide pack. I'll never get through everything, but we'll just use it as a bit of a backdrop to talk over. I understand that the slides will be sent out as well, and there's loads of useful content in there, so it's worth having it all there, but as I say, I'll never get through everything. So mass data fragmentation, so I didn't see any hands, so nobody knows what that is yet, so I'll kind of put meat on the bones as we go through. But in terms of I guess some of the kind of key issues that we have to think about in terms of our data and infrastructure footprints. So GDPR, compliance, multiple copies of data, unstructured or dark data. Often that's can be an issue in terms of our the way we approach these within our kind of traditional infrastructure architectures. And I'm going to ask a question which I don't expect to see any hands, maybe there will be. Who can say that they know exactly where every piece of data is within their organisation? Anyone? Well, brilliant. Well, one person, that's unusual. Don't normally see any hands to that question. I mean, it's an issue, and this you've probably seen iceberg. Loads of vendors use icebergs to kind of represent what we're talking about. And the top of the iceberg, so what I'm representing with that is primary data, production data. Most of us have a pretty good handle of what's going in within our production infrastructures, but actually the vast bulk of data sits below the waterline, sits in other areas of infrastructure over and above our kind of mission critical virtual machines, databases, the things that support those that we spend a lot of time talking about. Actually, the bigger problem is within everything else. So that everything else, what I mean by that is things like backup and recovery, file and object, which may be mission critical, but often the performance and SLA requirements aren't necessarily what we'd meet with our primary virtual machines, databases, etc. Then we've got things like archive, test and dev, search and analytics, and a bunch of other things besides. So if we take a step back from a policy standpoint, how many copies of data do we actually need? Well, we probably need at least two. It's very good practice from a data protection standpoint to have an off kind of production infrastructure copy. So maybe you want a couple of different copies in there. You need to consider things from an archive standpoint. But typically, we've got many more copies than that. Data or copies of the same or very similar data across various kind of workload and application silos. It's worse than that, though. Often what we end up with is kind of fragmentation even within those silos. So again, multiple copies of the same or very similar data. And that introduces challenges from a compliant and management perspective, complexity, lots more besides. And then when we kind of bring cloud into the picture, again, cloud's great, don't get me wrong, it offers us a lot of advantages and promise in terms of whether it's simplification or agility, lots more besides. But often, and this is borne out by a very recent survey that came out as well, we are now creating additional fragmentation and complexity within our architectures. Now, mass fragmentation, or mass data fragmentation, it's a US term, you can tell by all the Zs that are in the actual phrase there. And yeah, I mean, it's great for us, as it says there, if we can solve elements of this, we can utilize our data more effectively. But often, as I've already touched on, a bigger issue for lots of organizations are things like compliance and GDPR. And we're starting now to see things like search requests come in, and it's very tricky, even for the most evolved and mature institutions, to really get a handle on. And if a search request comes in, somebody asks for their data to be removed from your records, yeah, it's a challenge for just about everybody. Now, if this is starting to resonate, then you're not alone. Globally, it's an issue. There was a really good survey, which we can provide access to, that was done. 900 respondents, so senior IT decision makers from across the globe, multiple sectors, and some of the stats which I'll throw up here is what they found, that 87% of secondary data, so by secondary I meant that bottom of the iceberg stuff, so everything which isn't within primary data will encapsulate within the kind of secondary data bracket. And yeah, the vast majority came back and said that they're really struggling with the fragmentation. It's becoming nearly impossible to manage, and just to kind of keep the lights on, feed water, that element of infrastructure is becoming more and more of an issue. And by copies of data is that mass fragmentation. So we're not talking the 2 or 3 that policy dictates that we need. Typically, an organisation will have somewhere between 4 and 15 copies of exactly the same data across these various infrastructure silos. And often that's in multiple different elements of infrastructure, so that might be within their own data centres or colos or dedicated infrastructure, within public clouds, multiple public clouds. So we've got lots of copies of the same data across lots of different environments, and more it's taking significantly more time just to manage, significantly more complexity, and that introduces key elements of risk from a compliance standpoint. So in terms of tackling that within our infrastructure and our kind of IT requirements within our organisations, a good example of where these types of challenges have already been solved, and actually where a lot of these new solutions and new approaches kind of started and had their origin, was if we look back at the early days of internet search, and I mean modern search, so kind of turn of the century, when Google was just a kind of startup company, and companies like, well, Yahoo particularly, with the 800-pound gorilla in the search space. And what Google did, they took a step back. So Yahoo, they had a very similar infrastructure, or built very similar infrastructure to what we have now. So they were huge NetApp customers. They bought a ton of filers. They built these predictable performance virtualization infrastructures within racks, in effect. And that within rack element is key, because what they ended up doing was building kind of silos of infrastructure. It was very difficult for them to share data across these various infrastructure silos. So Google looked at the problem from a different direction, and they put a lot of time and effort into designing what came to be called the Google file system. So without going into too much detail about GFS, I mean, I can talk all day about things like GFS, but fundamentally they created an infrastructure that consolidated the data, kind of all of the data, in terms of the internet and search data that they were providing and utilising. They innovated and created new tools to manage that data, and on top of that infrastructure foundation they built, they plugged in a number of applications and services. The obvious first one was search, but on exactly the same infrastructure they built to support search, they were able to plug in mail, maps, YouTube. So when they bought YouTube, they said to the YouTube guys, just throw away your back end, we'll plug YouTube in as an application into GFS, and they were able to onboard them in record time. Obviously, we're not Google, but a lot of these things we can now implement within our own data center architectures, or data center, or cloud, or however you want to term it. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about Mohit. Google Mohit Aaron, incredible guy. He's the founder and CEO of Cohesity. What he's probably best known for before Cohesity is being the founder and CTO of a company called Nutanix, so very much a pioneer of hyperconvergence. The reason why this is particularly relevant in terms of the Google story as well, he was the lead developer on the Google file system. So really an expert in solving these really tricky data fragmentation challenges, and he's kind of brought that to Cohesity to solve some fantastic things within Nutanix. But as he describes, within Cohesity, what he's doing is solving, and the organisation is solving, even bigger problems within secondary storage. And key to that is the mass data fragmentation thing that I was talking about. So Cohesity, what does it do? So you can think of it similar to the Google diagram that I just brought up a second ago. So with Cohesity, it offers a single platform to consolidate all secondary data. So, okay, a new Cohesity customer is not going to do necessarily all of that from day one, but absolutely provides an opportunity to simplify, consolidate all the data into a single platform, manage the platform and all of the data via a single user interface, and that might be within a single environment, a multiple globally disparate environment. It could be in a physical data center, could be in public cloud, could be in remote offices, or a combination thereof, which is becoming more and more common. And on that foundation, they build a bunch of applications and services to leverage that data and provide those kind of key business functions that I was talking about earlier. Corner case is data protect and archive, but a load of other things besides, such as file services, test and dev, in-place analytics, and lots more too. So the idea is we think about what Cohesity offers us. It's an opportunity to move closer towards policy-defined infrastructure. So you've got some core things that you need to deliver for your businesses, for your organisations from a policy standpoint, and much more effectively, but simply and powerfully, Cohesity can provide the ability to more directly meet and answer those questions from a technical standpoint. So, as I say, huge slide pack, haven't got time to go into too much detail around this, but the key thing is, as I say, you've got lots of things that you need to deliver against within your organisation. Cohesity powerfully but incredibly simply enables you to deliver against those requirements and offers the opportunity to scale incrementally but still manage everything via a single pane of glass, scale things like capacity, performance, capability in unison, so you don't pigeonhole yourselves, because with traditional infrastructure, often particularly with storage, there's a requirement for you to have a crystal ball, try and predict what things are going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years for you to get the architecture right from day one. Cohesity, on the flip side, it enables you to deliver, directly meet what you need to do today, and then scale, meet these unpredicted business or functional requirements or whatever it is in the future, and you haven't pigeonholed yourself or created problems for yourself with the decisions that you made from day one. So the key thing is, as I say, I mean, this does go into a bit of detail now, but the idea, it's not just storage, it's not just capability, it's also insight. So one of the trickiest things that we have within our infrastructures, I used the phrase dark data earlier. What I meant by that is typically data only makes sense within our existing solutions for whatever the point solution it was put in for in the first place. But now, particularly as I say, in these days of GDPR and compliance, we need a more holistic view, a better handle across our entire estate as to what data we've got stored, and once we have an understanding and we've managed that data, we can use it for other things. So we can deliver against business requirements, we can do analytics against the data set. We look at something like data protection. In theory, that's a fantastic place to utilise the data for other things, because if you're protecting all of your systems, protecting all of your data, in theory, within your data protection solution, all of your data will have touched it at some stage. So if you can use that for test and dev, for example, if you can use it for analytics to gain business insight, to get a better understanding of your customers, to meet needs better, then that is a good thing to do, and it's incredibly tricky to be able to do that with existing solutions. With Cohesity, it addresses that incredibly simply, but as I say, incredibly powerfully as well. So the idea is, on top of this infrastructure and data storage foundation, you can do lots of other things. So for a service provider, it enables you to create backup services, DR as a services. And to say service provider, really what we're doing, whether we're service providers or we are IT leaders within our organisations, really it's quite, and MSPs have been doing this for years, it's good to think of our internal customers as customers. We're providing a service, whether we're providing a service as MSPs or global systems integrators to our customers that are purchasing services from us, or we're doing it as providing capability for our internal customers. Really what Cohesity provides better than anything else out there is the ability to think about infrastructure, think about capability in terms of what it offers, as opposed to the plumbing and how it's put together from a building block perspective and the restrictions that that dictates, and the necessity with traditional solutions to have multiple copies of the same or very similar data. So just to not wrap up, but open up the floor. So there's lots of talking I've just done in the last 10 minutes, lots of words I've thrown at you. I mean, does it resonate at all? Are these similar challenges that you're seeing within your organisations? Has anybody got any questions about what I've touched on so far? Nobody wants to put their hand up. I know we're the first session as well, aren't we? So
Just to wrap what Adam said there, is that Iomart, as Cohesity's initial service provider, we provide a number of service offerings. As Adam said, this is available on-premise, it's available in a shared model, hosted in our data centre, or it's available in a bespoke model just for you. So we can do this in a number of different ways. So it can be delivered as a product, as a service, or as a combined in a shared or private setup. So it's a solution which touches backup, security, and the search function is a key element that a number of other solutions that we've got.
Yeah. So I used the phrase policy-defined infrastructure a few times. So often, I mean, there are, I'd say, good reasons, but there are understandable reasons why we have these silos, because it's limitations within the technology solutions that provide that capability. And often you'll get a data protection solution from one vendor. Maybe there's been a change in amongst that. You'll have a decoupled backup application and storage solution, test and devs provided by something else. You've got maybe big data analytics cluster doing something else. And that's because you've got these key business challenges that you look to meet with technology, but the limitations of the technology mean that you've created lots of replication and complexity. With Cohesity, it gives the opportunity to take a step back and define from the top what your business and organisation need from a policy standpoint, and then work downwards and be confident that your infrastructure, if you built it in the right way, so with Cohesity addressing your secondary data requirements, that it's able to meet those without you having backed yourselves into a corner by taking the decision to go down the Cohesity route. So, for example, a really elegant way to approach infrastructure is to have, say, hyper-converged infrastructure for primary, or something like one of the best all-flash arrays integrating with your virtualization infrastructure within primary, and then something like Cohesity doing everything else, bit of network connecting everything together. Maybe you're doing things from an automation orchestration, so configuration standpoint, and that is genuinely about as good as it gets from a capability standpoint, but is also much simpler than chances are the majority of you are doing today. And it provides the opportunity for you to move to more of a generalist function within your organisations, as most people are doing, so getting away from virtualization specialists, storage specialists, backup specialists. This solutions like Cohesity, and particularly Cohesity, really support that digital transformation, that organisational change that we're all going through. But what's been left wanting to a degree is traditional approaches to solving these problems from a technology standpoint. Cohesity can really help with that.
Adam, nice, that's good.
Of course, yeah.
Conceptually, get it. Greenfield startup,
Yep.
get it. How do you start when you're dealing with a legacy mixed bag of data center, cloud, and everything? How do you start the journey?
Fantastic question. Yeah, it really is a great question. So you might have heard similar messaging from other vendors, and one of the trickiest, if we look at storage, one of the trickiest types of things to do is any change, particularly migrating data from one solution to another. And often that introduces elements of risk, etc. So say, for example, you were to go for just data protection, a new turnkey data protection solution from another vendor. Often the issue is that you're doing what you do today, and then you have to forklift, move everything in terms of policy, data onto the new solution. With Cohesity, it offers the ability to solve things strategically and tactically, in that with Cohesity you can use it as target storage, for example, for other people's backup software. So you could utilise Cohesity as target storage for Veeam, Commvault, NetBackup, whatever you like, either strategically or as an interim step, and then over time start utilising the integrated data protection functionality to start moving your policy function and your organisation into using Cohesity as a turnkey data protection solution. So there are a bunch of Cohesity customers for various reasons that are utilising Cohesity as just target storage for other people's backup software, because it's the absolute best for that. And I can put some context around that if anybody wants to come speak to me at the end. But in terms of the complications around any transition and transformation, the ability to do that and incrementally change over time really helps solve some of these migration challenges. And with Cohesity, just to be clear, you can implement it on premises as a turnkey hardware solution. So everything is managed via a single UI from a storage, data protection and everything else functionality standpoint. You can implement it as just a virtual appliance, or you can implement it as a cloud cluster within the likes of Azure, AWS or GCP. And the key thing is it's exactly the same software, however you deploy it, and you can manage it via, if you've got an environment like that, you've got different types of infrastructure. They provide something called Helios, which is their software as a service platform, where you can manage it via a single UI. And key, it will index all data across, if you've got a globally disparate architecture like that, and you can search against that data in a single place. Does that answer your question?
Helps, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a stand out in the main arena. If you've got any questions, please come and find us. Our time is up. Thank you for your time.
Cool.